I don't know if it's real, guys, but it's a hell of a story. I, 27 female, have been with my boyfriend Mike, fake name, also 27, since our junior year in high school. We were supposed to celebrate our 10-year anniversary 6 months ago, but since then, my entire life has fallen apart. The night of our anniversary, we were supposed to meet at the restaurant where we had our first real date forever ago. This was hard to plan, as we now live 2 hours away from the town we grew up in, and we both have crazy work schedules. The day of, he tells me he has a special surprise for me and to go out there in my car and visit my family, and he'll meet me at the restaurant at our set time. I want to say we both agreed to never get married, so I knew a proposal wasn't on the table, as my family and I'm sure most of you are thinking. Anyways, I was excited about this, as I had my own exciting news at the time. I had just found out I was pregnant and planned to tell my boyfriend that night. I visited with my family and told my mother and brother I was expecting, but not to tell Mike, because I was going to tell him that evening. We were all so excited. I get to the restaurant on time, and I'm wearing a dress I bought just for the occasion. I sit there for an hour before leaving. At first, I thought he was running late with the surprise, and then I started to become worried and he wasn't answering his texts, so I decided to head home and see if everything was okay. When I returned home, everything of his was gone. His clothes, his posters, his portions of everything, except the furniture and his car. My name is on the title because he has bad credit. On our bed is pages and pages handwritten by him. I'll spare you the details, but apparently, his childhood best friend, who I'll call Carl, started renting our furnished basement a few months prior, and it was all right. Carl was never a burden, always helpful with chores and cooking, and I never had a reason to not want him in my home. As far as I was concerned, he was family, and he said the feeling was mutual. The letter read that Mike and Carl were in love and running away together to escape their B families, and because Mike couldn't live this lie anymore. As much as I hate it, I respect it. I have many gay friends and know how hard it is for many. I mean, watch Why Women Kill and pay close attention to the 1980s couple. Naturally, I was devastated, but knew there wasn't much I could do other than allow myself to mourn my partner's and I's relationship, because for me, I was in love. Knowing that it wasn't my fault, it was just something I couldn't control, helped a little. My family called many times that night to see how the dinner went, because they wanted to know how he reacted to the news of me being pregnant, and they don't understand our marriage deal, and were always hoping he'd buck up, but I ignored all calls. The next morning, I was woke up by pounding on my door, and to my shock, it was Mike and Carl. I allowed them inside, asked if they had forgotten any of their things, and asked if there was anything we split they'd like to talk about taking, as there were a few things around I figured should go to them, such as the furniture sets from the living room or the basement where Carl was previously staying. As I imagined, they were in a new apartment and needed these things. What happened next shocked me. Mike cut me off with a hand up and asked how far along I was. I asked who told him, and he said it doesn't matter how he knows, just that he knows, and he wants to be a part of the child's life. I said of course I planned on involving him, as it was his child too after all. He then stated that he and Carl wanted to stay in the basement apartment until I gave birth, and at which point he and Carl would be moving upstairs and I could have the basement until I found a better place. I asked why in his right mind I should give them my home, and they said so they could raise their baby together without his past there to ruin it. I laughed out loud, which really pissed him off. He said I know they can't have kids together, and that the least I could do for stealing the last 10 years of his life was to give him his baby, since I could always just go have another one. I was appalled by this, and said I sympathize that they can't have their own children together, but that gives him no right to take mine from me. And that I would say he stole the last 10 years of my life too, but I actually loved and planned a future with him. Meanwhile, all he did was lie when he could have left amicably sooner and saved us both the trouble. I didn't force him to do anything, and he's out of his mind for thinking I owe him my child. Carl hadn't said anything until the end, where he told Mike I was right and dragged him out. Carl sent me an apology later that night. Radio silence for a week, and I thought it was over until my first OBGYN appointment, where I was told that I had a chemical pregnancy and that the egg never fully attached. So I was no longer pregnant. This hurt, but was honestly a relief, because now I wouldn't have to do custody with my ex, who I never wanted to see again. I told only my mother and brother. Mike showed up same day, screaming and pounding on the door, insisting I aid the child just so he couldn't have it. At one point, he tried kicking down the door, so I called Carl to come get him. Surprisingly, Carl showed up with the police and had Mike arrested. Carl stayed until after they left, to which point we spoke through the door. He said he's sorry for everything he's done to me, and he's sorry I lost my baby. We ended up talking for a while before he said that Mike isn't the same man anymore, and he's very verbally and physically aggressive lately, and uses the excuse that he can finally take his anger out properly, since Carl is a man and he can take it. He told me he got a restraining order pending, and I should get one too. That's the last time I heard from either of them. Christ on a cracker! I'm so sorry about the baby, OP, and I feel crappy for being relieved too on your behalf. But I am relieved. Shared custody with that heartless, selfish loon would have been hell. So Carl was okay with screwing you over as long as it was all rosy? Regardless, I'm glad he had the sense to cut his losses and at least apologize and warn you. This is one hell of a banana story if true. A cheat is still an a-hole. It's worse in your case because it's supposed to be a joyous thing. The great coming out, and supposedly you were gracious. Methinks you were in shock by being polite and helpful. Hopefully you can fill in the holes with some updates on who kept informing him. It was one of two people, and you're allowed to lose the plot just because he and his bestie found love. So he had an affair with the gay friend who stayed in your basement. They moved out on your 10th anniversary. I don't understand why you're having conversations with Carl at all. You're a much better woman than I am for sure. I could care less if he has become aggressive. They deserve each other. My sister-in-law and I both had babies about 6 months ago. Her 2 weeks before me. This is her third. This is my first. She lives about 15 minutes away from us. We're both off of work, so she has been coming over almost every day with her kids to help me. And to be honest, I'm getting really tired of it. From the beginning of my relationship with her brother, she was never very nice to me. I get her hesitation with me. I was 25 when we met and almost 13 years younger than him. But between my husband and I, that has never been a problem. And I don't think it's anyone else's business. He warned me she can be protective of him and wasn't that nice to his first wife either. So I took her with a grain of salt. She's warmed up a lot over the years, but once I got pregnant, she was all over me with advice, which I think I've handled graciously. But ever since the baby came, she cannot stop trying to correct me, criticize my choices, making snide comments about me. Of course, she is the worst when my husband isn't home, but even when he is, she still criticizes him for how he's holding her, feeding her, playing with her, etc. She won't stop telling me it's time for me to stop breastfeeding since the baby is starting to eat some new foods. She wasn't able to breastfeed her baby this time, and I think that's a lot of her problem. Our house has a pool, and when we take the kids out to the pool, she will never stop talking either about how lucky I am to have good genes and bounce back after pregnancy, or that I need a more modest bathing suit around her 6-year-old son. These comments are among many I listen to all day long about basically anything I do with my daughter. It came to a head yesterday when she let herself in, which isn't unusual. I usually don't mind, but she came over a lot earlier than she normally does. And I was topless feeding my daughter in our living room. She screamed and told her older kids to go outside before launching into a tirade about decency and whatever. I was barely even listening before I told her to get her nosy butt out of my house. She went on that it was her brother's house. I was a no-good gold digger who didn't pay a penny to live there and had just seduced her brother to take his money. Like total madness. I told her again to get out or I would call him, and she left. I spent the next hour consoling my daughter and getting her to settle down and finish eating before I called my husband. Apparently, she had called him first and told him a totally untrue series of events, and I told him what really happened. He said he believed me and he would talk to her about the rude things she said, but that we needed to give her a break. Her husband and her were having a hard time and had separated not long into her pregnancy, which I do feel badly for her for. And we were really all she had. His parents and other sisters live on the other side of the country. He also said I should try to not be so argumentative with her, and maybe she would calm down with me a bit. Since he said that's what he's done since they were growing up. I was super annoyed with the whole thing and hung up on him. He came home with my favorite dinner and tried to get me to call her and smooth things over. I said absolutely not. She can call me and apologize if she really wants to. He went back to work today, and I haven't heard from her. Frankly, it's been my nicest day with my daughter in a long time. He just called on his lunch and asked if she could call me. I said no. He said it made him sad that we weren't getting along, and we both know she is childish. Maybe I can be the bigger person. I do want to get along with her for the sake of my husband, and my daughter does enjoy time with her auntie. But I don't want to be the only one to have to make changes. What can I do? It's time for your husband to have a backbone and let his sister know that her advice isn't wanted or needed. He needs to set firm boundaries with her, like not entering your home uninvited if she doesn't want to chance you being topless while breastfeeding. Having you be the bigger person is just a cop-out to avoid dealing with her. He made a choice to spend his life with you and make a family with you. He needs to back you up with dealing with his sister. Our father died in 2010. It hit my brother particularly hard since he and our dad were very, very close, and it hit my mom even harder. Both of my parents were virgins until marriage by choice and loved each other very deeply. My mom went into severe depression after his death, barely leaving the house, staying in bed for days at a time, speaking barely audibly. My brother had to become the man of the house, taking care of me and our younger siblings. Currently 21 male, 19 female, and 18 female. And he definitely had the biggest part in helping our mom cope with Dad's death. My mom finally recovered in 2015, and lately she's considering dating again. I'm ecstatic for her, and I'm excited for her to finally move on from her loneliness and find happiness again. My brother lost his crap over this. When she mentioned possibly joining online dating sites during Christmas, my brother chewed her out, calling her a W.S., accusing her of not loving our dad. Just very cruel and awful things that reduced my mom to tears and left me in shock. My brother's fiancé also joined in, repeating the same insults. To my complete horror, my younger siblings also chimed in with similar thoughts, voicing disapproval of our mom's desire to be happy again and claiming disrespect of Dad's memory, though they didn't verbally eviscerate her like my older brother did. My brother and his fiancée left the house in the middle of Christmas Day. That's how mad he was. The day after, he left a voicemail threatening to go no contact if our mom does start dating again, saying she wouldn't get to see his wedding or meet her grandchildren. After she heard it, my mom broke down in tears again and called him immediately, promising that she would never date again. Just typing this makes my blood boil, since my older brother, who I looked up to as a hero, turned out to be a sadist who delights in his mother's suffering. My older brother is our mom's golden child, and he knows it. So he knew she would follow his threat. So ducking evil and manipulative. It's almost surreal. My brother is ducking bullying my mom into staying inside the house the rest of her life because of his bizarre ducked-up notions of love and posthumous fidelity. I talked to my brother privately about this, and he said he would never forgive Mom if she tried to replace Dad with another guy, because he somehow sees moving on and meeting other people after your partner's death as replacing them. Despite the obvious love my mom and dad shared, my brother somehow convinced himself that Dad never meant anything to her if she's willing to disgrace his memory by becoming intimate with other men. I'm mature enough to realize that everything he's saying is antiquated, misogynistic BS, but yet my brother, an Ivy League-educated chemist, and my younger siblings, whom I suspect have been influenced by my brother, believe our mom to be a W if she tries finding happiness again. I was considering telling my brother that our dad would want Mom to be happy again and not stew in loneliness and dwell on his death forever. But considering how heated he got over this topic, I held my tongue. Any attempts to reason with my mom and tell her to not live in fear of my brother were useless, and she now resigned herself back to loneliness. This is especially frustrating since our mom was very excited about meeting new people, getting back into dating, etc., since she is relatively young and still has plenty of years left in her. And then my a-hole sadist brother had to ruin everything. What the hell do I do? Do I try to get through my brother's skull that he's being a piece of crap? Do I try to convince my mom to stand up for herself and live life by her own rules? How? Tell your brother how disappointed you are in his behavior, and if he's going to treat your mother like that, then he should just stop coming by. If your mom has a religious, spiritual figure in her life, it might be a good idea to talk to them about her moving on. A therapist if she's not involved religiously. Talk to your younger siblings about how they treated your mother and find out if they were influenced by your brother. Ask them why they thought calling their mother a S was acceptable. Ask them if they prefer their mother sad and lonely because her children hold her happiness hostage, so they don't have to deal with their feelings of their father. I hope I won't get flamed for this. I know that the very mention of social classes is antiquated and elitist and gross. Even the word class makes me cringe with embarrassment. But it's also the truth. I don't know where else to turn because this is such a controversial topic, especially as it's told from my end of the situation. I'm just hoping to be as honest as I can and see if anyone else has ever experienced this or can help me deal with it. Growing up, my family wasn't speedboat wealthy, but we were comfortable. My parents placed a lot of emphasis on things like table manners, conversational skills, and education. I was extremely lucky to grow up the way I did. They both worked hard so we could afford to travel as a family, and I could go to top-notch schools. They wanted me to see the world and learn as much as possible, so I could appreciate what I had. Although they are wealthy and I grew up in a nice house, I never had a trust fund or anything of the sort. I got a small weekly allowance throughout my childhood, enough for candy basically, only if every single chore was done, and it was understood that I'd get a job starting my freshman year of high school. Just putting the defensive little caveat in because despite the money, they worked hard to keep me humble, and I admire them for it. I've always worked hard. I built my career the old-fashioned way, and although I enjoy a nice income, I personally am not rich. We rent our apartment, we follow a budget, etc. So my husband comes from a solidly blue-collar background. His family money, or lack thereof, was never important to me. I married him for his loyalty, sweetness, and his good heart. However, here's where I turn into a snob. Yesterday at the table over Christmas dinner, they were cracking fart and booger jokes, and his 31-year-old brother, lacking a napkin, wiped his mouth on the tablecloth. They don't ask questions or have interesting conversations, and their grammar is hair-raising. Being around his family really brings out this horrible, belching, lackluster side of him, and then I have trouble pretending it doesn't exist when we're alone together. I've known this about them from the beginning, and yes, I married him anyway. However, lately, it's really been bothering me more and more, and I don't know what to do. I start daydreaming about what it would have been like to marry someone whose background aligns with mine. Someone to whom I can relate on a different level. I spend the entire time I'm with his family smiling and thanking them, and helping his mother with the cooking, etc. But inside, I'm cringing and crying a little over the fact that this is my life now. They live close by, so it would be tough to swing the twice-yearly visit thing. I realize it would be best to simply get over myself, ignore their ways, and focus on why I married my husband. But every time I'm with him, I start to feel so uncomfortable and out of my element that he seems like a stranger to me, and I feel totally adrift and sad. The effect lasts for days and has started to poke holes in my respect for him. I start to greatly resent the fact that he even finds these stupid, crass jokes funny. I start focusing on this side of him for weeks and months afterward. Lately, it's becoming a much bigger deal when he misuses a word or shovels his food in his mouth without attempting to make conversation at a restaurant. I'm starting to despise him for it, things he can't help. I have on occasion asked him if he could slow down, put his fork down between bites, and ask me about my day. But A, it doesn't change anything long term. He is innately who he is. And B, I feel like an a-hole every time I do it. It's not fair to either of us, or sexy, for me to assume the role of his mother. I realize no marriage is perfect, and that his good heart matters more than his table manners, his grammar, or his love of witless humor. Trust me, I've been repeating this mantra to myself non-stop for the past 6 years. But I wouldn't be posting here if this wasn't really starting to get to me. Sometimes, I honestly feel like I might have chosen differently if given the chance. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this? I would very much appreciate your story, how you got over it, if so. Edited to add. A few commenters have noted the difference between class, money, and values, which is a good point. Let me add that I agree. It's best to not describe it as a money or class issue, but rather as a values issue. I haven't encountered families like mine who behave the way his does, so I let my own experiences and scope influence my phrasing. It's better discussed as a values issue for sure. The thing is that the class word holds within its valuing quality, as if someone of a higher class would be a better, more valuable, more quality person. But of course it's not like that. The different social classes are like different cultures. The differences exist, and they are very clear. But people are still just as humane and valuable regardless of their culture or class of origin. Still, like you said, class differences do exist, even if people like to pretend they don't. But maybe this comparison of class to culture could help you deal with this. In a way, it's like marrying a foreigner. They and their family simply do things differently. The humor is a bit different. The customs, habits, topics of conversation are a bit different. You're experiencing culture shock, and things feel wrong, and you much prefer the way things are done in your own culture, the one you grew up in, and the one you see as right. It's natural. I don't think you'll be able to ignore or get over the culture gap, much in the same way a closed-mouthed and distant Finn might never quite become a social and talkative Italian, even if they happily married one. Maybe try to stop stressing about it. Stop trying to become blind to the differences and accept and embrace them. He hails from a different background. He's not from your culture. Inevitably, you'll never be as effortlessly easy and familiar as you would have been had you married one of your own. But on the other hand, you'll learn new perspectives through him, even if you may find them distasteful. And you fell in love and chose to marry him after all. Just remember, he is the way he is because of how he grew up. Also, try to gently introduce topics of interest you'd like to discuss to him, but try to let him fall back into his culture of origin when with his family, and accept that you're a foreigner of sorts. It's not the end of the world. Tons of people have international or intercultural marriages. It has its own difficulties. But it's not like one can only be happy with someone of their own familiar set, background, culture. You don't need to be the same as his folks, and the same goes for him. If he gets unbearable, try to talk to him about it, but try to keep it very light and polite. Don't say bad manners, say different manners, for example.